Welcome to Civitas Conversations with Senator Richard Stevens.
Senator, thank you very much for sitting down with me for this Civitas interview.
Sure.
The purpose of this interview is to sort of raise the profile of state politics. We want to get the word out, who our representatives are, and keep North Carolina in touch with them.
Good.
And so what we'd like to ask first is just to hear a little bit about your district. What's the demographics, any sort of history there or concerns that they may have?
Sure. I represent southern Wake County, no part of Raleigh, but about half of Cary, all the town of Apex, Holly Springs, Fuquay Varina, and Garner, and the unincorporated areas in between. Geographically, it's a fairly suburban area. A lot of newcomers who've located to the area in the last 20 years, mixed in with a lot of natives, almost all suburban. There's very little industry in the district, and not a lot of history, because it was basically a farming area of Wake County for many, many years up until just a few years ago.
I see. So it's sort of a bedroom community nowadays for the Raleigh area.
Very much so. So, for example, the part of Cary I represent does not include the historic downtown Cary, but the newer suburbs of Cary. Apex, though, is a very historical town. It was the highest elevation along the railroad, the peak, the apex, if you would. In fact, they call themselves the peak of good living, still to this day. And so they have sort of a railroad history in their background. Holly Springs and Fuquay Springs, which later merged with the little community of Varina to become Fuquay Varina. Fuquay Springs and Holly Springs had springs, and people would come there to take the waters, if you would. They were supposed to have curative powers back in the 19th century.
Very interesting.
So they kind of grew up with hotels and kind of a resorty kind of area. But both those communities have developed into new suburban, very active and fast-growing communities. Holly Springs, for example, one of the fastest-growing towns in the state.
So has that changed the political demographic of all?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. Southern Wake County was a Southern Democratic stronghold for a long time, and now it's a very Republican, suburban Republican district. Has been for the last probably 10 or 15 years.
So what is it that brought you specifically into government? What was it that made you decide to run?
I should probably go back for a minute. I spent a career in local government before state government, and I served specifically as county manager for Wake County for about 16 years, and had a chance to be involved with all aspects of the county government and all parts of the county. And I lived here all my life.
So you went to Chapel Hill, correct?
Except for going to Chapel Hill for 3 degrees. All my life has been in Wake County. And so when I retired from county government and started a consulting business, I wasn't quite finished with public service, I guess is the best way to put it. And I thought maybe there's another opportunity to serve.
I see.
And I was fortunate enough to be elected in 2002 and re-elected in 4, 6, and 8, and hopefully in 10 for my 5th term.
So how do you go about representing the 17th? How do you, what issues really galvanize that community, and how do you represent those issues?
It's a diverse community. We have folks in the Garner area who are long-term citizens. We have folks in the Holly Springs area who've been here 2 years or less. And so it's hard to find a common base among 170,000 people or so that make up the district. But for the most part, they're folks who care a lot about quality service. They want to make sure their taxes are low. They want to make sure the government is efficient and non-corrupt,
Of course.
and that quality services are provided. They want good schools. They want good roads. They're willing to pay for it, but not too much. So there's a good commonality in that sense.
So would it be fair to say that it's less ideological and more pragmatic?
I think so. I think very much so. And I try to spend a lot of time in the district. And because it's so diverse, and because one part, even just a few miles away, may be very different in sort of philosophical thinking than another part. And it takes a while to get around to the district. But I try to do that when I'm not at the General Assembly, to make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, which is to represent the interests of the people who sent me here.
I see. Well, sort of moving from the more pragmatic area of politics into just sort of an ideological focus, I was sort of wondering if discuss a couple of bills that you voted on. There's, of course, the recent, very maybe I would say controversial bill, the ban indoor smoking. And I understand that that sort of cut the Republican Party in half, so to speak, and that you were for it. And I was sort of curious what it was that you approved of that bill.
Part of me was against the concept of that kind of legislation. And that part of me is that government ought not to intrude in what private businesses are doing. We ought to give private businesses as much freedom, tax them as little as possible, and restrict them as little as possible in terms of their ability to get their work done, hiring people, putting people to work. Part of that is respect for private property rights, that if you own property, you ought to be able to decide what happens with that property. So that's the side that was, of me, that was against that bill. But my father died of lung cancer. I know what smoking can do to people. I've seen what secondary smoke can do to people. My mother didn't smoke, but she suffered from secondary smoke. So I've seen that in my own family. And so for me, the personal and the health side in that particular occasion weighed out the private sector interest of protecting private property rights, because I do know that smoking can affect non-smokers. And in public places where the public is invited to come, not your private home, not your private business, but where people are able to come and eat or entertain themselves with other people, and you've set up an invitation to do that. I think you've crossed over the line a little bit enough for me to say, okay, the government has a right to say, in this particular environment, people should not smoke.
Yeah, it's always a compromise.
Many votes are a compromise. There's nothing pure usually about any particular vote, because there are many sides to every issue.
Quite.